Hi, I'm Sarah Glassberg, and this is AJFF In Conversation, the Jewish Film Podcast. We recently held our first AJFF Selects of the season, and it was our first virtual edition of our Selects program. Our Select series is basically more of what our audiences love about the annual festival: new, independent, and international cinema, and of course, Q&As. So in today's episode, you will actually hear the Q&A from our May Selects film, Stand, a stirring cross-cultural musical in which a young immigrant couple finds romance on the streets of 1919 Winnipeg as they battle for a better life amidst violent social upheaval. The film stars Marshall Williams from Glee and How to Build a Better Boy. And it also stars some local talent, Atlanta's very own Laura Slade Wiggins, who some of you might know from Shameless and Nancy Drew and The Hidden Staircase. And we were very lucky to have both Marshall and Laura join us for this panel. Also joining us for the discussion was Juno-award-winning writer and composer Danny Schur. The Q&A was moderated by Emory Theatre Acting Artistic Director and Associate Professor Donald McManus, a Montreal native whose family experienced similar labor unrest as that depicted in the film. And he joined us from all the way in Melbourne, Australia, where he is currently. So it was multiple time zones, lots of very interesting social issues, as well as questions of how did the adaptation go from the stage musical to the film. And I think you will all really enjoy it. So without further ado, please now enjoy this conversation on Stand.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival's post-screening interview session for the film Stand. My name is Professor Donald McManus, Associate Professor at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and Acting Artistic Director of Theatre Emory. I also am a Canadian boy. Grew up in Montreal, Quebec, and have some direct connections with the events of the film that we've all just watched. My mother grew up in Winnipeg, and my grandfather, her father, was a veteran from World War I, returning to Winnipeg, and had been politicized during World War I and stood with the strikers during the general strike in 1919. This is an AJFF Selects event, so I'm very excited and pleased to be talking to Danny Schur this evening, composer, producer, and co-writer of Stand and the original musical stage play Strike that this film is based upon. And I will be speaking with Danny quite a bit about the adaptation process. Being a theater guy as well as a film guy, I'm interested in how we get from the stage to the screen. Laura Slade Wiggins, who played Rebecca Almatzoff, is here with a slightly different look.
Yes, the blonde.
That's what actors do. And Marshall Williams, who played Stefan Sokolowski in the film. And I think I'll just jump right in with a little background. So, Danny, I thought I'd ask you about the experience of going from the stage to the screen.
So I'll go out of order. It was an American who influenced me, inspired me to make the movie. As it happened, in the first production in 2005 of the stage musical Strike, which it was called before the movie made it be Stand, sitting right beside me is American actor Jeff Goldblum, who at that time was going out with the lead female actress, a Broadway star from Winnipeg, Catherine Reeford. And the show was done. He was very impressed, slapped me in the chest and said, big story, big ideas. This would make a great movie. And, in my Canadian insecurity, I just thought, wow, if Jeff Goldblum, A-lister American, is saying this, it must be true. And I naively believed it would just happen in a year or so. And I found out in my large-scale movie musical naivety just what a process it is to adapt stage to screen. You've got a 2-inch thick, 120-page stage musical script, and you think it's 2 hours long. I'm done. What's the problem here? So not the case. I learned about the difference between stage time and screen time. This is something that is actually quite Darwinian, where our brains specialize in speaking to a live person. And you know what it's like when you have a conversation with a friend, 5 minutes goes by just like that. That's in-person stage time. On screen, you know what it's like. If you watch a monologue for like 30 seconds, it seems like an eternity. So those 40 scenes that we had that took up 2 hours for the stage play needed to turn into 120 scenes that are this long for a movie. That's the quick synopsization of the difference between stage and screen, that stage time versus screen time. So the process of adaptation was not only gross, but took upwards of a decade of write after write after write. And you know what they say about musicals? They're never written, they're rewritten. So it was such a lesson. And then simple things like some actors don't sing. There goes a song. Some songs that work on stage, the director said, yeah, it's just not doing it for me. It's too old-timey. And we don't have 500 people that can sing, or we don't have the budget to have 500 people singing a song. So a lot of the stuff from the stage show got left on the cutting room floor or just didn't make it in at all, because really it's apples and oranges. All the more reason people should see the stage show if they get a chance after the movie.
You mentioned that some actors can't sing. Was everyone singing their own parts? There was no dubbing of roles.
You should speak to Laura and Marshall about that. We took great pride in no dubbing. This was not like the Hollywood musicals of old where everything was dubbed. And it was just a joy recording Marshall and Laura when we did back in 2018 in Winnipeg.
Well, let me ask you, Laura and Marshall, about preparation. A little easier for Marshall since he's from Winnipeg, so probably had heard about this event throughout, learned about it in school and all of those things, and knew that the territory, physical territory of the city and that kind of thing. Were you familiar with Winnipeg or Canada or any of this history before you got the screenplay and told to get in your Jeep and go to head north? How did you prepare other than learning the music, obviously?
I did not know about the strike. I had heard about some of the strikes that happened, and I don't remember if it was before or after now, but like there was like the Newsies strike that happened that musical theater people know about because of the movie. My experience with Winnipeg was like that one episode of The Office where Michael Scott gets like a vacation to Winnipeg. So I had a huge learning curve, but it was fascinating once I got there because a lot of our buildings are historic there, and all the history is there's still a walking tour, not to mention all the cultural information on our characters that Danny was able to make sure that like I understood about, because he has a Jewish side of his family and a Catholic side of his family, and a strong immigrant presence, right? Is it both sides, Danny?
Yep.
That came from the immigrant? Yes. So and it's crazy to me how many living people, like ancestors, that can still really tell a lot about that voyage coming over to America and how they were treated and how they felt. So it was all fascinating for me to be immersed in that. It was very rewarding and heartbreaking at the same time.
So Marshall, you're a Winnipegger, so you knew the turf.
Yeah, you learn about it in school and whatnot, and you see any of the historical sites that are around. I think in terms of probably just learning the accent was the most difficult thing, but I'm usually pretty all right with sound things, I guess.
I got to add that when we were recording Marshall, it was just such a joy because usually you have to do so much introduction of the musical aspect and the technical aspect. Marshall just showed up and was like, I think I should sing it this way. He had a real vision of like what you had to sound like because of what was going on in the scene. You couldn't just sing the song. You had to act like the scene was. He was damn good at that.
Yeah, I think you have to thank you, Danny, as well. I think when you're reading the script, then you have to realize that what you're singing that's going to be what you have to sing on the day. So if I don't want to give out a spoiler, but if something really bad happens, then you're probably going to sing in a way that you're emotionally something is very bad happening. You can't just sing it clean. So you have to like read through the script and make sure that vibe is going to be appropriate for what that is.
You're doing the acting scene and then rolling right into doing the kind of capturing the performance of the song in the shooting day.
You kind of have to like almost act the song while you're singing in the booth because and then remember that performance for on the day. That's how it should be like. So you can't really alter your performance too much away from the song. Like, yeah, you can move around and stuff, but the emotions that you're giving out during that initial recording, because there is no overdubbing, then it has to be what you presented on the day originally.
Right.
And there's an anecdote from McDonald's commercials that I heard a long time ago. The mic doesn't lie. And the story goes that for McDonald's commercials, without seeing the singer singing in the studio, an executive said, they're not smiling. Everybody smiles in McDonald's commercials. You can really hear if someone's acting through the mic. So
one thing that really interests me about this film and the project is the way it's a 100-year-old story, as you just, but it was the film is very now. So it's kind of speaking to the now. And even since you wrote the show, it's more, I think the relevance of what the struggle is seems more apropos than ever. And my understanding is that Lisa Bell's character was an addition or an adaptation from the original stage show. And I was particularly interested in Gabriel, who plays Gabriel, if I understand it correctly, the Matesy guy, which is not in the original Strike.
Correct.
That character didn't exist. So that was a kind of was that a conscious effort on your part to kind of
it was
bring it to
when I wrote it in 2003 and 4, as Laura mentioned, she plays a version of my Aunt Jean, a really progressive, decades ahead of her time person. In my family, it was reversed. Jean, my aunt, was the Catholic who married Harvey, the Jewish man. So, as Laura mentioned, I have a foot in both cultures. So that was 2005, and it was what I know. It was what I knew. It was my family experience. But come 2018, we get a director who's a specialist in musical movies, specifically dance musical movies, a 25-year Hollywood veteran, a Canadian living in Los Angeles, Robert Adatui. He was taken with the script because in his family, there was an interfaith, cross-cultural relationship there. His dad's from Nigeria, his mom was from Germany. So he really related on that respect. And he said to me in a really diplomatic way, he said, Dan, love this script. It's just really white. And it's 2018. I know for a fact there was Black people in Winnipeg. I know for a fact there's Indigenous people. So I was like, totally, we're into that. Let me check. The very day, and I remember this because it was February 1st, the first day of Black History Month, I go to Black History Month Canada, and there's a story about the Oklahoman refugees, about how these Oklahomans migrated north during the Great Migration, starting about 1907, and made their way to Winnipeg and Regina and Edmonton. There was an all-Black regiment of troops in the First World War from Edmonton. So it was just a natural to have the formerly white Irish character the maid, be Emma from Oklahoma. And then just a little bit more research, we found out just how many, specifically Métis, and that for our American friends is a specifically Manitoba origin term that referred to mixed race white and indigenous people on the French side, is distinct from the English. Tons of Métis sharpshooters in the First World War. So just a natural to make another Irish white character be Gabriel. So it was better history and just more representative.
So, Laura, was there any particular struggles that you had in dealing with this role? And
well, there was definitely a fine line to realize when she would be going into unsafe territory, like being too bold, because obviously we're going through our own kind of women's Reformation movement going on now, even in 2021, with like Me Too and the job, like, you know, getting women into the workplace and all that stuff. But back then I was dealing with a girl in really almost 1920 who didn't have parents, who had her faith that meant a lot to her, but she wasn't going to use that as an excuse not to be a part of the story. And so she puts, you know, Stefan's family in grave danger doing what she's doing. And the jeopardizing them getting to Canada and getting to North America in the first place. So sometimes just, you know, and I did rely a lot on Danny, you know, to make sure that we were just in the pocket of that time frame and who these people were coming from, you know, Ukraine, and even the differences in how they would speak, you know, that made a big difference. Their accents are different from Polish accent to the Ukrainian one. And it's been a minute, so hopefully I'm using everything correctly. But it was those were my challenges, was just to be really specific with what she was doing and what was bringing it about versus just making her, you know, a suffragette that's ready to be on the move, but why she is and what her perspective is, not having parents and kind of being orphaned from all of this. It's just her and her brother, and her brother is, you know, Moisha is very overbearing on her. So she's constantly trying to get the upper hand and also have her voice in this movement.
I'm interested to hear from Marshall about this as well. The whole dialect problem, because obviously the community in Winnipeg today doesn't still hang on to even a Yiddish accent really anymore. But Laura, your character Rebecca, where's she from? I mean, do you have a sense of where in the old world Rebecca had her roots, or is that a thing Rebecca wouldn't be thinking about, just kind of running with it?
Well, we did think that we did decide that she probably moved fairly young, but I don't know exactly where in Ukraine. I think, Danny, do you have an answer to that? Because that's actually really interesting for people watching the film.
What I always say is, this is how Stand is somewhat of a sequel to Fiddler on the Roof. What was going on in those shtetls is just like what you see in Fiddler on the Roof. On that side of the river was the Jews, on this side was the Christians, and it was all the Pale of Settlement, which is basically a swath immediately south of Kiev, that whole agricultural land. So roughly everyone who's Ukrainian who ever came to Manitoba, be they Jewish or Christian, came from like about an hour or two south of Kiev. I could tell you the exact cities. I won't go into that. But when I was doing research about my family, I learned more about my family from the repository of Jewish history in that town. So very intermixed Christian and Jewish settlements 2 hours south of Kiev. And Jews had lived in that area for 1,200 years. And it ended with the Holocaust.
Yeah. Marshall, how did you struggle with the dialect for this Ukrainian? Well, he's a New World guy, but he still has his father's accent hanging about him.
It's just learning another accent.
I guess you and the actor playing your father were kind of riff on that, and I assume that's not his natural dialect either.
No, and like the more you speak with your father on screen, then the more like you have some sort of. I think the most important thing beyond getting as close as you can to the accent is, but the relationship that you have with your father in this case, and as long as there's consistency there, the technicalities of that accent shouldn't detract from the performances.
Since you were in Glee, are musicals where you see your career going particularly? And obviously film musicals are a rare bird, but how do you see your career shaping for the future?
I always like a challenge in things, so I always look for challenging projects if they come across my table. Right now, I'm on my third script that I'm writing. I'm in the process of recording a bunch of songs, and then probably going to start doing some other things as well. So I think challenging roles for acting is ideally where I want to be in, and then pushing forward the back end of projects and creating my own things.
Laura, you brought up a subject I think is kind of important, of this character as a dynamic young woman of that period. Of course, the women before World War I, the women are out there, like I think you used the term suffragette. When are we ever going to get the vote? This idea of her as a new woman, that was a big, was that, what one of the things that drew you to the script, to kind of, I guess it's a little bit of that, what I was asking Danny, the now in the past, I guess it's strength of the film, in my opinion. Was that something that popped out for you when you read the script?
Absolutely. I really found that to be a very rich character, and I think she goes through a lot of development because I'm used to playing characters, I guess, that are pushing the boundaries for where they are, but not a lot of them seem to understand after they've pushed too far. And there's definitely the point where well, first of all, where Moisha gets arrested. I think she fears that she's pushed too far, because now she's put him in jeopardy. And then also once the letter comes in from Stefan's family, I think that you see that she wasn't trying to separate the family, but she believes so fervently, and she's right in what she believes in. It's just going through those emotions. And I see it even today when women are trying to push ahead. Sometimes we push so far ahead that feelings get hurt, and the line gets crossed in a way that nobody meant for it to come across that way. And so it's like two people arguing over different things. But I like how at the very end of the movie, you do see this coming together on like what the principle of the whole thing is, which is just human lives in general, and what are they worth at the end of the day. And I think the movie paints a pretty prominent portrait that everybody is important, even the little girl at the very end who can't find her mother. There's nothing more important to Greg's character than finding that little girl.
Right. Well, that's a really interesting answer. And thinking back to your performance in the film, where you're kind of tipping from, where she's this dynamo, but then fragile, and at the, in the next beat. And I think that you kind of unpack that for us. And sounds as if maybe the love story is the anchor there. That's that these two guys can grow together. That's the way for the future. So maybe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I definitely feel that the two ideals are able to kind of blend, and that's where a lot of us come from, is from these mixed families, and that's what's beautiful about North America in general.
An elderly woman said to me, because I said, so what would it have been like in 1919 for an interfaith relationship? And she just sort of looked to the air and said, a Catholic and a Jew, people were killed for less.
Yeah.
We have no
Wow.
idea how bad it was.
Danny, what are your plans from the film moving forward? Have you watched it with an audience yet and got the...
Oh gosh, yeah. Like we're a year-ish delayed due to COVID. So in in September of 2020, the plan was that it was to have been released in 1,200 theaters across the United States. That didn't happen. So only on May 1st of this year did it come to digital in the United States. On May 18th, it's being released in Canada. So it really kind of is just getting its first audiences. The patrons of the AJFF are going to be seeing it as fresh as anyone. So it's kind of been in COVID suspension for a good year and a half. It's just now going to play in other territories other than Canada and the United States. So it's going all over the place. I've seen it tons with audiences. It was released in Canada pre-COVID in theaters. It became the #1 Canadian movie at the box office. There was nothing more glorious than watching your own story in a packed theater in your own hometown, seeing your hometowners like Marshall and the Atlanteans like Laura. It was a glorious thing.
I think one of the big strengths of the film, we're going to just wrap it up now, but one of the big strengths is that it's honoring that legacy of intellectual history and courage and labor movement, etc. But also it's a film with a lot of hope in it, especially for young people, which is what a lot of my students and the younger generation are already looking for. They're struggling with angst at the moment, social unrest. And what's the future for me? If I have a baby, what's the path for it? And I hear them talking about that a lot. And we need a place where people say, yes, I can have a family and the future is going to be bright and I'll build on what my grandparents did. And I think the film tells that story in a beautiful way that we can all celebrate. And it's really lovely that you could join us and say hello to the Georgia and Atlanta audiences who are starved for some excitement and being moved and remembering what it's like to get out in the streets and fight the good fight. Thanks, y'all, for coming here. I'm going to sign off from Down Under. See you soon.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thanks again. See you, Laura. See you, Marshall.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, Danny.